I'm going to give a small tutorial on how to use a very basic modeling software. And the great thing about this software is it's all online and you don't need to download anything, so you don't have to worry about that. So you want to open up your browser and go to tinkercad.com. Once you're here, you want to make an account by saying join now because they won't let you use it otherwise, but don't worry, it's a very trustable website. It's actually by the people who made all the other CAD software. So I've already made an account, so I'm going to just sign in with my Google. It's going to take a second, and when you get to this screen, you see all your projects, and well, you guys are not going to have any projects because I've made all of these in the past, but what you want to do is press create new design, and you're going to be presented with your 3D workplace. So this plane here can be moved around by holding down your right mouse key, and you can see it's a 2D plane and you can place objects on it. And you can see over here when I move the plane, this also moves. That just kind of shows you the orientation of which it's in. So you can go ahead and like press top and it'll show you the top angle, or press front, or if you want to view it from an angle, you can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to take your attention to over here. This is all the tools that you're going to need to make any shape you want. So you can see here, this doesn't look like the average 3D modeling software with tons of tools and things you can do. It works on two very basic concepts: adding objects together and subtracting objects together. So I'm going to give a small demonstration of that. So I'll bring in a box by just clicking on the box, and then I can move it here. And once it's here, I can press on it and change all of the dimensions. These are in millimeters, so that's 2 centimeters right there, or 20 millimeters. So I want it to be 100 millimeters by 100, and you can adjust the depth as well. You could also adjust everything by physically moving the cursor around by dragging it around, but I prefer to actually put in the number to be more exact. So let's bring in a cylinder now so I can show you what adding and subtracting does. So we brought in a cylinder now, and I want to add this cylinder to this box. So I can simply move it wherever I want, let's say here, and I click on this, hold shift, and click on the box. Now both of these are selected. Alternatively, you can hold your left cursor and select everything. Once you do that, you press Ctrl G and the two pieces become one. So now that's one solid block instead of two pieces. You can press Ctrl Z to go back in steps. This is like very default key bindings. And for subtracting, it's the exact same thing. You press what object you want to be the whole. You can see here, I can change this into a whole rather than a solid object. And then I can move it here. And when I bind these together now, that actually subtracts away from it. So now you have a whole. Now I'm going to show you how to align two objects together to make more symmetrical groupings and subtractings from each other. So I'll bring in a box again and say I want to make a hole directly in the middle of this box. I'll make it a little bigger to give myself a bit more room to play with. And let's make it a little thinner. I'll bring in my cylinder and make it into a hole. And I'll select these both together. And you can see up here, these are all the buttons that I control bind to, but it's a lot easier and faster just to use a control binding instead of physically pressing on these buttons every time. So I'm going to select both of these together, and this time I'm going to press the L button. which corresponds to align over here. Now this brings up the aligning interface. You can see these dots, and these represent where the two objects will be aligned to each other. So if I press over here, it'll align it to the very edge. Also on this edge, and if I want it in the middle, I'll just press the middle one. And that's just on one axis. Now I want to come over here and press on this so it aligns it from both axes. There's also the z-axis, and we could also press in the middle to make sure it goes all the way through. And now once they're aligned, we'll select them again and we'll bind them again with Control G. Now you have a hole directly in the middle. Now let's say we want a box with a hole directly in the middle on every side. So we'll bring in a cylinder and we'll make this a little bit smaller, say 10 by 10. So the first hole is not going to be any different from what I previously showed you. You just align them together by L, bring it in the middle, and join them together. Now we have a hole through there. We'll bring in another one and we'll do the same thing. Just so I don't have to make the cylinder again, I'll press on it and I'll copy paste it a couple times with Control C and Control V. Copy, paste, paste. So now I want to align this horizontally to this box. So you can see over here, if I go above this arrow, it gives you an angle to tilt this on. You could drag this with your hand, but I prefer pressing on the actual number. So I'll do 90 degrees. Make it into a hole, and the same thing. We're aligning it, but on different axes now, but it's the exact same process. So it's all aligned on every side now because these are all grayed out, and we'll join them again. Now for the other side, we need to make two different rotations. So I'll make this horizontal again, and I'll rotate it one more time on this axis by 90 degrees. I'll make it into a hole, and the same as before, I'll align them. And it's all aligned again. Wait. Yep, it's all aligned, and we'll join them together. Now we have a box with holes going everywhere in it. Let's say we want to make something a little bit more functional. Say a stencil that you want to spray paint your art pieces with. So I'll start by bringing in the box again and making it bigger. And I'll make it a little bit thinner because stencils are usually thin. 5 millimeters is good enough. And I'll move it here so I have some space to work with. So I want to make a little pattern with cylinders. I'll bring in a cylinder and make it smaller. And I'll copy this cylinder once. So I want to have an array of these cylinders exactly the same width away from each other. So what you're going to do is select both of these cylinders and align them so they're exactly on top of each other. So I want to move one cylinder so it's exactly 5 millimeters away from the other cylinder. But what you gotta have to take into account is that this cylinder itself is 10 millimeters wide. So you gotta add your 5 millimeters to the 10 millimeters. So that's 15 millimeters of movement. So I'll grab one cylinder and I'll just move it 15. You can see here that if I accidentally shift left and right, it changes the number, and that's not what I want to do. So I just generally move it in the direction so I know which number is changing, and I'll just input my own number. So negative 15 here, and I'll make this 0 again to make them aligned. So now they're exactly 5 millimeters apart. Now the great thing about the grouping button, Control G, is that the items don't have to be touching for them to be grouped. So if I select both of these and group them together with Control G, even though they're not touching, they become one unit. So now I want to repeat the exact same thing one more time on another edge. So I'll copy paste it and I'll align these again. And I'll do the exact same thing as it before. Move this 15. I'll just change this to 15 and make this 0 so they're aligned. And now they're perfectly symmetrical. Now I want to combine all of these together. So now they're one unit. Now we want to do this one more time. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, but not really, because you have to take into account that this object grew in size. So now instead of being 10 millimeters wide, it's 25 millimeters wide. So this time you'll have to move it by 30 millimeters if you want a 5 millimeter gap. So I'll align these again, and I'll move it by 30. So now they're perfectly aligned. And then I'll join all of them together again, so they're one unit. I've already done this in the past with other parts and shapes, and I've saved them to my collection. So I can just show you really quick. So say this hexagon pattern, but I obviously want this to fit inside of there. So I could either hold this and change the shape, but you can see the aspect ratio changes, but I don't want that to happen. So what you can do is hold down your shift button as you're moving this. So keep the aspect ratio. That's still a little bigger than I want, so I'll make it a bit smaller. And that's nice. So I'll make this into a hole. Now I want to align this on this edge of the board, but I want it to have a little bit of a clearing over here. If I just align these together on the edge, you'll see it comes to the very edge, but that's not what I want. So I'll grab either this block or the pattern and I'll move it 5 millimeters from the edge. So I'll grab this and move it 5 millimeters, and I'll just adjust that myself. And you see the negatives because it's in 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions I should say, because if I move it the other way it's 5 millimeters, so you gotta take that into account. Now that they're aligned, I'll grab these and join them. And now there is a pattern in there. I don't really care about the aspect ratios of these spheres. I want them to make them a little oval shaped. So I'll drag them out and make them a little bit thinner. And I'll do the exact same thing, make it a hole and align it. And I want it 5 millimeters from this edge like before, so I'll move it again by 5. It luckily landed on that. I'll make this 0 again so it stays in the middle. And I'll join these again. You can also add text to your objects by going into basic shapes, so the initial interface, and pressing on text. I want to rotate this so it matches the other lines. And over here is where you can actually modify the text. So let's say I want to put my name in there. Now I want this a little bit smaller to fit into the box. We'll drag it. That looks about good. Make it a hole. And I want this directly in the center. So I'll align them in both ways. And then I'll grab both of these and I'll join them together. Now I have a little stencil sheet I can print out. So now we want to export this so we can get it ready for 3D printing. We'll go over here, press export, and this interface will pop up. I suggest exporting in STL even though OBJ works. I've never used this format, so I'm not sure about that, but I always default to STL because 99% of machines will read this file. Press STL and a saving window will come up. We'll call this test 1. Most Windows computers, I'm assuming Mac computers as well, have a built-in 3D viewer. So when I press this, it'll open it in Windows' default built-in viewer. and you can see your shape over here as well to make sure it exported correctly.